Hey, you're on the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. just for you. We look at life through a biblical lens. We try to solve all the world's problems in 2 hours or less. Sometimes we run a little bit over. We have a number of things that have been occurring. You've been watching the news, and so you know what's happening. But you don't really know the ins and the outs. You don't have the right perspective until I tell you what it is. As we're looking at the political scene, we've got the Federal Election Commission chairman, a fellow by the name of Trey Traynor, who's saying that the affidavits from the Trump campaign show that fraud has occurred during the November general election. He said, quote, "The massive amounts of affidavits that we see in these cases show that there was in fact fraud that took place," end of quote. This was an interview with something called Just in the News AM that happened on Friday. In response to a question from a reporter, Carrie Sheffield Traynor specifically mentioned a sworn affidavit by Stephen Miller, a professor of mathematics at Williams College. Miller, who specializes in analytic number theory and sabermetrics, never heard of that one, flagged nearly 100,000 ballots in Pennsylvania for potential voter fraud after analyzing election data and phone interviews. Between 89,397 to 98,801 ballots were either requested by someone other than the registered Republican or requested and returned, but not counted. Over on the other side, where the COVID germs and such lie, we have a pathologist, a top pathologist he's called, Dr. Roger Hodkinson. Roger told government officials in Alberta, Canada, during a Zoom conference call, that the current coronavirus crisis is, in his words, and I quote, "the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public," end of quote. Hodkinson's comments were made during a discussion involving the Community and Public Services Committee, and the clip was subsequently uploaded to YouTube. Noting that he was also an expert in virology, the study of viruses, Hodkinson pointed out that his role as CEO of a biotech company that manufactures COVID tests means, quote, "I might know a little bit about all this," end of quote. He received his general medical degrees from Cambridge University in the UK, an MA, an MB, and a bachelor in CHIR, I don't know what that is, where he was a scholar at Corpus Christi College. Following a residency at the University of British Columbia, he became a Royal College certified general pathologist and also a fellow of the College of American Pathologists. He's in good standing with the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta and has been recognized by the Court of Queen's Bench in Alberta as an expert in pathology. He says there is utterly unfounded public hysteria driven by the media and politicians. It's outrageous. This is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public. The doctor went on saying nothing could be done to help the spread of the virus besides protecting older, more vulnerable people, and that the whole situation represented, quote, politics playing medicine. And that's a very dangerous game. Hodkinson remarked that the social distancing is useless because COVID is spread by aerosols, which travel 30 meters or so, 95 to 100 feet before landing. He called for society to be reopened immediately to prevent the debilitating damage caused by lockdowns. Hodkinson also slammed mandatory mask laws as completely pointless. Masks are utterly useless, he said. There is no evidence for their effectiveness whatsoever. Paper masks and fabric masks are simply virtue signaling, he said. Virtue signaling is when you are telling people, I care. They're not even worn effectively most of the time. It's utterly ridiculous seeing these unfortunate, uneducated people. I'm not saying that in a pejorative sense, but seeing these people walking around like lemmings, obeying without any knowledge base to put a mask on their face. The doctor also slammed the unreliability of the PCR tests, the polymerase chain reaction test, a test which is diagnostic that determines if you are infected by analyzing a sample to see if it contains genetic material from the virus. He notes that, quote, positive tests do not, capital words, do not, underlined in neon, do not mean a clinical infection, and that all testing should stop because the false numbers are driving public hysteria. Hodgkinson said the risk of death in the province of Alberta for people under the age of 65 was 1 in 300,000, and that it was simply outrageous to shut down society for what the doctor said was just another bad flu. I'm absolutely outraged, he said, that this has reached this level. It should all stop tomorrow. What do you think? Somewhere on the other side of the spectrum is Franklin Graham. This week on Newsmax TV, a program called Spicer and Company, Franklin was asked his opinion about the election. And he said, quote, the world seems to be in trouble, whether it's the storms or the political problems we have in this country. And the only hope for this world is God. It's not the politicians. Politicians can't solve the problems we're facing. Only God can. I've asked for people this weekend to pray for our country, that if there was fraud in the election, that it would come out, and the people responsible for the fraud would be made known. If there was not fraud, that would be made known, so that our country could move on and get this behind us. And I think how important that is. We are so divided today. WesternJournal.com asked the question, what is the job of the media? Tom Vineski, writing for WesternJournal.com, maintains that media types are not responsible to pick and choose what American voters see or hear. The media exists, he said, to give us a seat at the public table, reporting, not making the news. He points to a case when Neil Caputo from Fox News cut away from a White House briefing when the president's spokesperson, Kayleigh McEnany, said every legal vote should be discarded, saying, every illegal vote, I cannot in good conscience continue to show you this. My opinion, that's what happens in Russia and other nation states run by minders. It's not what happens in a free press. I guess the media believes that they have the responsibility to guide the rest of us toward truth rather than simply reporting the news. ChristianHeadlines.com has an article about a Massachusetts budget bill that contains an abortion amendment. And the governor wonders what one has to do with the other. Seems the Massachusetts House passed a 2021 budget amendment, 108-49, that expands access to late-term abortions. Those babies who are murdered just before they're born. And protections for babies who survive that kind of behavior. Did I mention that Democrats control the Massachusetts House? You probably figured that out already. The governor is a woman, most likely will not sign off on that amendment. Massachusetts law allows a line item veto. On the other coast, a San Diego judge just allowed strip clubs to reopen, at the same time insisting churches close. Any studies being done to see how many churchgoers are getting COVID? The balance of commercial power may have just changed. China has stepped into Uncle Sam's shoes and now anchors the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. They call it RCEP. It covers an area of 2.2 billion people, one-third of all economic activity on the planet. And the bottom line? China's partners in this RCEP are likely to remember for many years which of the two giants was more reliable. China, Japan, Vietnam, the Philippines, and all the smaller island nations nearby, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Mexico, and the entire western edge of South America. In an October 22nd op-ed piece for the World Journal, a North American Chinese language news publication, Joe Biden argued that the United States, quote, can't isolate itself from the world, end of quote, and would be better off working with other countries. He said we have to work with other nations to meet global challenges that impact us all, starting by rebuilding relationships with our closest partners. This is a translated version of the op-ed. It was written in Chinese, I believe. Speaking of Joe Biden, Dr. William Donahoe is the president and CEO of the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights. Now, assuming that Joe Biden is chosen as president next month by the Electoral College, he's going to pose a serious problem for the Roman Catholic bishops. Indeed, the head of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Archbishop Jose Gomez, indicated this week that the bishops are already beset by Biden. If Biden were a Protestant, it would not complicate matters for the bishops, but he's a baptized Catholic, actually a Roman Catholic, because there are at least 3 or 4 major Catholic groups in the world. The Roman Catholics never use the term Roman unless they have to. They want you all to believe that they're the Catholic Church, but they're not. There's 2 or 3 others. At the USCCB meeting last week, Gomez said there were some policies, such as immigration, where Biden's faith commitments will move him to support some good policies. But there are other issues, such as abortion, which Gomez stressed is our preeminent priority, where Biden deviates sharply from the Roman Catholic teachings. And to deal with this dilemma, Gomez appointed Detroit Archbishop Alan Verneron to head a working task force. He will head and coordinate efforts among the various U.S. CCB committees. Among Biden's stated top priorities is to codify into law the Supreme Court ruling in Roe v. Wade. In other words, Biden wants to lock in the right of a woman to abort her child at any moment of the pregnancy for any reason whatsoever, thus blunting any future court challenges. Biden explained his stance last year, saying he personally agrees that life begins at conception He says, I am in agreement with the doctrine of my church. He failed to note, however, that the consequence of his decision as a public official on a matter that impacts the public cannot logically be seen as personal. Not to mention his personal decision being dismissive of scientific evidence on the beginning of human life. It does not begin at birth. Biden also wants to get rid of the Hyde Amendment, thus forcing taxpayers to pay for those abortions. Biden was a supporter of the Hyde Amendment when it was introduced in the 1970s, and he stayed the course right up until June of 2019. That was when, 2 months after he announced he was going to run for president, that he flipped sides. Similarly, he wants to change Title X so that Planned Parenthood and other family planning entities can receive federal funds to pay for these abortions. Gomez said at the Bishops' Conference that these policies are going to create confusion among the faithful about what the church actually teaches on these questions. How could it not? You've watched former Vice President Joe Biden these last 6-8 months. You know he's a different person. You know he's saying and doing whatever was necessary for the hierarchy in the Democrat Party to put him up as president. Not because he's the best candidate, they don't believe that. Not because he is going to do all these wonderful, marvelous things. No, he has agreed to go along with their program so that he might be president. And there are some credible people wondering if he will live long enough to see the end of his first term. With Kamala in the background. Kamala, who couldn't get a vote when it came to the preliminaries on the run-up to this, backing out of the contest before any votes were taken. Suddenly she's thrust into the position of a vice president. What do you think? WesternJournal.com had an article this week about church security, the Church Security Institute. The fact that this institute tweeted as IRS statement, Biden Cancer Initiative founded 2017 by ex-Vice President and Jill to, quote, develop, drive solutions to progress in cancer prevention, detection, diagnosis, research, care, reduce disparities in cancer outcomes, etc. End of quote. In the first 2 years of this foundation, no grants were given. Instead, they spent millions on salaries and ex-District of Columbia aides. Representative Stephen Smith from Georgia, Republican, tweeted in response, tax filings reveal Biden Cancer Charity spent millions on salaries, zero on research. My comment is of course, this is the way it works. You didn't know that? People start these programs not to help other people, but to help themselves. Oh, and they do help other people. They help people stepping up, getting better salaries. They don't help the people they're supposed to be helping. It's not true of everybody, but it's true of liberals, and especially liberal politicians. CNN's Jake Tapper was interviewing Dr. Fauci about timetables for the new corona vaccine. And he made the proclamation that, quote, Christmas is probably not going to be possible this year. Franklin Graham stepped up and said, you wish. Christmas is going to be celebrated by millions and millions of people around the world. The reason is that Christmas is not about gatherings and festivities. It's about the Lord Jesus Christ. It's about God giving his Son sending him to earth to save us from our sins. And as Christians, we celebrate that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. That's what Christmas is about. And COVID doesn't change it. Christmas celebrations may not be exactly the same this year. But for Christians, Christmas is in our heart. He wrote, "My prayer is that this Christmas millions of people will turn to Jesus Christ and put their faith and trust in him as the pandemic continues to grip hearts around the world with fear and anxiousness." These are some of the things that happened while you were busy going to work and doing all the things that you do. I was watching, and I shall continue to do so. When we come back, we're going to look at some world events. Stay tuned.